The feeling of abundance is significant in brain development because it's the warming process, the facilitator of the transition between the reptilian brain, which is a pain and subsequently fear-based brain, and an empathy-based brain. The brain begins with fear in fight, flight, and freeze, with a later adaptation of fawn or please, and moves into the limbic semi-conscious reactive emotional, moves into the rational, and then finally the empathic area of the brain is where we start to experience our humanity. An animal, a sociopath, can relate purely out of fear, purely out of pain. But a human being, what defines us as a humanity is empathy and transcendence, the top two regions of consciousness and brain development. And that doesn't occur until the feeling of abundance is what warms the temperature psychologically, and the consciousness moves up into the empathic brain. Abundance is therefore an incredibly important feeling to cultivate. It's also an important reality to realize, because it's very hard to feel abundant if your needs for survival, security, love and belonging, self-esteem, the development of one's gifts, the bringing of those gifts abundantly into the world, valuably, honorably into the world, and then becoming part of something bigger than ourselves. That sense of abundance is what liberates the transcendent area of the brain. So abundance is an alchemy. You have the feminine side of abundance, which is the feeling. We have gratitude, we have love, we have enthusiasm, we have joy. You can start with the feminine side in meditation and bring that into the outer reality. And you can also start with the outer reality and bring it into the inner reality. In other words, if you're safe, if you're surviving, if you feel a sense of security, if you have an abundance of love and belonging on the outside, human beings who understand you, who participate in your growth and development, if you have a richness of self-esteem, meaning you understand your desires, you understand your values, and you're realizing those values, it's a lot easier to feel abundant. Case in point, there's a pot boiling in the kitchen in the background, and I'm hearing this rattling sound. And I'm wondering if it's going to get onto the microphone, but it's also constantly distracting me. And so it's a little bit harder to have the feeling of abundance in terms of the goal of this video. An immediate sense of peace, an immediate sense of relief, just pausing and turning the flame down. Now there's stillness. The rain has stopped. And with that feeling of abundance comes outer focus. Because when we feel poor, we feel scared for the future. When we feel scared for the future, we become self-absorbed, because it's very difficult to be generous, to think of others, when our own needs may not be met. Now, the most needy parts are the inner child, the inner adolescent, and possibly the present reality. As the adult in us fails to meet our human needs, either externally or internally, meaning if we're surrounded by adults, the adult is the one that's capable of loving, that's capable of being of service, that's capable of listening to the need within and responding. The adult in ourself is similarly the one that's able to hear the fear, to hear the anxiety within, and respond. Respond with attention, respond with generosity, respond with taking action. And so it's the inner adult that's capable of engaging within and without in a way that leads to competence. And competence and time and, at least initially, hard work is what leads to outer abundance. If you're building computers and you have no idea what you're doing, and so none of the computers work, then your company goes bankrupt. And when your company goes bankrupt and you don't know how to solve that, then your future is dimmer. Your fear goes up. So abundance is created with a mixture of competence, which comes out of care and discipline. Because if you really care about yourself, others, the future, you will take steps to become more competent. If you become more competent, you will become more successful. Now, admittedly, there's unfair playing fields, there's different starting points. Success in reality is on an endless continuum. But if you care with discipline, you will become more competent. If you become more competent with discipline, you will become more successful. If you become more successful with discipline, you can generate more and more value. You can create abundance. And with that sense of abundance, increased survival, security, love and belonging, self-esteem. Self-esteem is earned along the way, because if you have a value, an ideal of caring, of competency, of excellence, and you move along that way, you will earn self-esteem. Self-esteem is simply living up to your own values and standards. It's incredibly important to create the feeling of abundance mentally, emotionally, physically. We have abundance of time, we have abundance of space, we have abundance of food, we have abundance of entertainment, we have an abundance of friends, and each of these require a different talent to create in that domain, a different competency, and requires time and energy to realize our potential. But the positive emotions, peace, joy, love, gratitude, wonder, happiness, they're all functions of the empathic and transcendent regions of the brain. And those regions of the brain are only available to human beings who have a sense of abundance. We're more generous when we have a sense of abundance. And it's a literal thing. It's an abundance of energy. It's an abundance of money. It's access to resources and an abundance of interesting things to do. There's also different parts of the psyche. For example, in trauma, you have an early age that feels unwelcome, that feels overwhelmed, that's in too much pain, that can dissociate from the body, dissociate from the personality, be banished, not just to one's room, but to a corner of the psyche. And once dissociated and isolated, even as the rest of the self grows on and grows up, that part of the self may not feel the sense of abundance that the rest of the self comes to feel because it's dissociated, because it's not welcome, which is where love and belonging begins within. To have an abundance of love and belonging includes going back to those moments, to those phases of the psyche that have never had a home, that have never been welcome. Maybe there's a very, very picky part of the self that was screaming as an infant and had to be managed and was hated and resented by the whole family for that pickiness, so it just kind of got pushed to the side. Much of the self may be overabundant, may have too much, but that really fragile, picky part has not had anything of love directed to it. It's always been seen as a threat, as a burden, as something taboo. And so love and belonging abundantly begins by looking for those shadow, forgotten parts of the psyche and welcoming them home. Because as each part feels the abundance, each part can transcend the barrier from the reptilian, the limbic, the dead rational, meaning you're aware cognitively, but there's no real feeling of connection, and can move towards empathy, towards transcendence, the identification with something bigger than the self, the whole ecology.